What are your thoughts on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album? I'm such a fan of that album and the Beach Boys in general, but that album is just amazing. Paul McCartney actually said, God only knows. He said that song may be the greatest song ever written.
Yeah, and that's really saying something because he's one of the greatest songwriters ever to walk this earth. Yeah, it's been a minute since I listened to it, but I do know it well. I would say that it's a great example of a musician really using the studio as an instrument, which is something I've always personally been really fascinated by. It's something the Beatles were really great at, bands like Led Zeppelin. It's in other words, you go into a recording studio and one version of the story is you just try to capture the sound of the live band. Hey, we have a great live band, just put the mics on, try to recreate the live show on a record. And that turns out great some of the time. It can be a little challenging on its own. But I think that folks like the Beach Boys and a record like Pet Sounds and bands like the Beatles and Pink Floyd are in this other category of really wanting to use all the tricks of the studio to layer things extensively, to put effects on things you really would be very, very challenging to create live. Although now, as I say that, with enough money and enough human beings on stage, you can usually create them. So Pet Sounds is that. I think it's a studio project that uses a lot of the interesting technology and tricks of the studio. And two, the other thing that jumps out to me is that it's a very, songwriting wise, like you mentioned, very vulnerable, very, I think the songwriting on that record kind of spans a lifetime from almost like teenage level puppy love, wouldn't it be nice, to more nuanced and frankly realistic portrayals of love like God Only Knows, which you always hear people play at their weddings. And I'm like, he says the second line is I may not, or the first line is I may not always love you. It's kind of a bummer sentiment, but it's also realistic, and that's why I think people respond to it. It's a real human, it's the reality of the human condition.